What do you want? Andrew Douglas, Brian says simply. Hand him over to me and you walk away unharmed. You and your son. Nobody needs to get hurt. Everyone goes back to their normal lives. And him? That's not your problem, Brian says coldly. He's a fugitive, a wanted man. What happens to him after you hand him over is law enforcement business. Helen looks into his eyes and sees the naked truth. Brian will kill Andrew the moment he has him. And probably kill her too, because dead witnesses don't testify. No, Helen says clearly. Brian blinks, genuinely surprised. What? I said no. I won't hand him over. I won't cooperate with you. And if you try to force me, I'll scream, loud. And there are security cameras here and people everywhere, and you can't kill me in a hospital parking lot without consequences. Brian's mask of professionalism slips, revealing the pure rage underneath. You're making a fatal mistake. Maybe, Helen agrees. But it's my mistake to make. She pushes past him, gets in the car with trembling hands, starts the engine. Brian doesn't move, just watches as she drives out of the parking lot, his gaze burning holes in her back through the rearview mirror. Helen drives for 20 minutes before realizing she's crying, silent tears running down her cheeks as she processes the reality of her situation. She just signed her death warrant. And worse, Michael's death warrant. What was she thinking? Why can't she just be like everyone else? Look the other way, survive? Why does she have to be a hero when being a hero means dying? She parks at a Walmart miles from home, goes into the bathroom, and collapses in a stall. She sobs silently, allowing herself just these few minutes of weakness before pulling herself together. When she emerges, red eyes but renewed determination, she finds Andrew waiting near the entrance, exactly where they arranged. Mrs. Garcia took Michael to her house with the excuse of a sleepover with grandchildren. They have the night to plan. He approached you, Andrew says immediately, reading her face. What happened? Helen tells everything as they drive to a cheap motel far from everything they know. She tells about Brian waiting in the parking lot, about the barely disguised threat, about how he saw Andrew enter her apartment. So he knows, Andrew says grimly when she finishes. And now we can't go back to your apartment. They'll be waiting. I know, Helen responds. That's why I got money from the ATM. $300, everything I had. Should last a few days if we're careful. They check into the motel using cash and false names. The attendant doesn't even look up, too accustomed to clandestine couples and fugitives to ask questions. The room is depressing. Peeling wallpaper, smell of mold and cheap disinfectant. A bed that's seen better days. But it's safe, for now. We need help, Helen says, sitting on the bed while Andrew checks the windows. We can't do this alone. You said you have evidence. Where is it? Part in a bank vault in the Loop. False name, paid in advance for a year. I have the key with me. Andrew touches his pocket. Second part buried in Lincoln Park near the Lincoln statue. Third part on an online server, but I need a specific computer to access without being traced. And this evidence is enough to bring down the whole operation. More than enough, Andrew confirms. Names, dates, bank transfers, audio recordings, signed documents. $2 trillion stolen over a decade. 300 people implicated, including 3 senators, 12 judges, 45 high-ranking police officers, and CEOs of 30 construction companies. Helen whistles low. No wonder they want you dead so badly. The problem, Andrew continues, is that I can't just hand this over to any authority. The corruption goes too deep. Local FBI is compromised. Prosecutors are compromised. Half the judges who'd work these cases are on the payroll. So who can we give it to? Andrew pauses, considering. There's an investigative journalist, Rebecca Martinez. She works for the Chicago Tribune, but also freelances for national publications. She's exposed corruption schemes before, has contacts in Washington who are clean. If we can get the evidence to her, she can publish the story before they can silence her. Helen completes. Make it too public for them to cover up. Exactly. So how do we contact her without being traced? Andrew smiles for the first time in hours. You have a cell phone? Of course. Give it to me. Helen hands over the phone, and Andrew promptly disassembles it, removes the battery and SIM card. They can track this. Tomorrow we buy a burner phone and call her from a different public place. Helen watches him work, seeing the strategic judge emerge from beneath the homeless facade. He survived 8 months on the streets because he's smart, careful, methodical. You've done this before, she observes. Running, hiding, planning. Not exactly, Andrew admits. But being a federal judge teaches you to think like criminals. I spent years witnessing how they operate, how they avoid capture, how they think. Never imagined I'd use that knowledge to save myself. They spend the next hours planning. Every detail, every move, every contingency. They'll recover the evidence from the vault first because it's easiest. Then, the online server in an internet cafe with VPN. Last, the park because digging attracts attention. And after we have everything? Helen asks. We meet Rebecca in a crowded public place. We hand over copies of the evidence, not the originals. She publishes, and then we disappear until the storm passes. Sounds too simple when you say it like that. None of this will be simple, Andrew admits. Brian Turner isn't an idiot. He knows we have the evidence. He'll be waiting for us to try to recover it. So we need to be smarter, faster, more careful than him. Helen lies on the bed, looking at the stained ceiling. Are you afraid? Always, Andrew responds honestly. But fear didn't stop me the last 8 months. Won't stop me now. I've never done anything like this, Helen confesses. Most illegal thing I ever did was drive over the speed limit. And now I'm… what? Running from the police? Participating in a conspiracy? You're fighting for justice, Andrew corrects. There's a difference between illegal and wrong. Sometimes the right thing is illegal. Sometimes the system is so corrupted it needs to be broken to be fixed. Helen turns to look at him. This man she barely knows, but in whom she's placed all trust. Why me? What? Why did you come to me? Of all the people in the city, why come to me? Andrew considers the question carefully. Because when you saved me, you didn't ask if I deserved to be saved. Didn't check if I was a productive citizen or a lost drunk. You just saw a human being in danger and acted. That kind of courage, that kind of instinctive kindness is rare. And I needed someone rare. The words touch Helen deeply, validating a choice she herself questioned 1,000 times. Maybe she's not an idiot. Maybe she's exactly who the world needs her to be. Rest, Andrew says, turning off the light. Tomorrow we begin, and once we start, we can't stop until we finish. Helen closes her eyes, but it takes hours to sleep. Her mind keeps returning to Michael, to the son she left with neighbors under pretense of work emergency. She promised to be back in 2 days. She needs to be back in 2 days, because if she's not, Michael will be orphaned, and Helen Matthews has done many wrong things in her life, but failing her son won't be one of them. Act 3, Final Confrontation and Redemption. Chapter 7. The hunt begins. Morning breaks cold and dirty over Chicago, the kind of day when even the sun seems reluctant to appear. Helen wakes with body aching from the uncomfortable bed and constant tension. Andrew is already awake, sitting in the room's only chair, looking out the window with a sentinel's attention. Movement? Helen asks, rubbing her eyes. A car passed 3 times in the last hour, Andrew responds without taking his eyes off the street. Could be coincidence, but I learned not to believe in coincidences. They shower quickly, put on the same clothes from yesterday, and leave the motel using the back exit. The plan is simple in theory, impossible in execution. Recover the evidence without being caught. Contact Rebecca Martinez without being traced. Expose the truth before Brian finds them. Simple, impossible, necessary. They buy a burner phone at a convenience store, using cash and keeping faces away from cameras. Every move is calculated. Every second counts. Helen feels the weight of surveillance even when she can't see anyone watching. Is it the paranoia that keeps people alive, or the one that drives them crazy first? The bank is in the Loop, Chicago's financial heart. Glass skyscrapers reflect the gray sky while Helen and Andrew blend in with corporate workers walking with determined purpose. Andrew wears borrowed clothes that make him look like a middle-class consultant. Nothing that attracts attention. Stay here, Andrew says when they reach the bank. If something goes wrong, run. Don't look back, just run. Find Rebecca on your own and hand over whatever you have. Nothing will go wrong, Helen says with conviction she doesn't feel. Andrew enters the bank while Helen waits across the street, pretending to look at shop windows, but keeping eyes on the entrance's reflection. Minutes drag like hours. Every person entering or leaving could be a threat. Every siren in the distance could be coming for them. 15 minutes pass. 20. Helen starts sweating despite the cold. Then Andrew exits, walking calmly, a small black backpack hanging from his shoulder. He doesn't run, doesn't look around nervously. Just walks with the confidence of a man who just concluded routine banking transaction. They meet 2 blocks later in a crowded coffee shop where they can lose themselves in the crowd. "Did you get it?" Helen whispers. Andrew opens the backpack enough for her to see. Documents, flash drives, external hard drives, years of meticulously compiled evidence. "First part complete," he confirms. Now the online server. They go to a public library on the south side, far from anywhere Brian would expect to find them. Andrew uses a public computer, connecting through multiple VPNs, erasing history as he works. Helen watches the room, looking for threats, seeing potential enemies in every unfamiliar face. It takes 2 hours, but finally Andrew copies the second part of the evidence onto another flash drive. 2 of 3 parts complete. "Now the park," Helen says, checking the clock. "But it's busy during the day. How will we dig without attracting attention?" "We wait until nightfall," Andrew responds. "We meet Rebecca first, hand over what we have. If we can get the third part after, great. If not, what we already have is enough to start an investigation." Helen agrees, but before she can respond, her new burner phone rings. Only 3 people have this number: Andrew, Mrs. Garcia, and Jessica from the hospital. It's Mrs. Garcia, and she's crying. "Helen, gracias a Dios. Men came here looking for you. Police officers said Michael is in danger, that they need to take him for protection. But Helen, something wasn't right. The way they looked around, how they asked questions about you." Helen's blood freezes. "Where is Michael now?" "With my son somewhere else. I didn't say where. But Helen, those men, they scared all the children. Said they'd come back with a warrant. Don't let anyone take Michael," Helen orders, her voice trembling with fear and fury. "Nobody, not even with a warrant. Call me immediately if they try." She hangs up and looks at Andrew, seeing her own terror reflected in his eyes. "They went after Michael," she whispers. "Brian is using my son as bait, or as leverage," Andrew says grimly. "Forcing you to surrender in exchange for his safety. So what do? We accelerate everything," Andrew decides. "We call Rebecca now, schedule a meeting in an hour, hand over everything we have. Then you get Michael and disappear while I finish this." "No," Helen says firmly. "We're not separating. That was a terrible idea yesterday, and it's still a terrible idea today. We do this together or we don't do it." Andrew is about to argue when his gaze is drawn to something over Helen's shoulder. His face pales. "Don't turn around," he whispers urgently. Brian Turner just entered the library. Helen's heart races. How? How did he find them? "Track the credit card?" she asks quickly. "Didn't use a card, only cash." "The phone?" "Burner. Impossible to track." "Then how?" And then Helen understands. The car that passed 3 times by the motel. They've been followed since the beginning. Brian let them get this far, collecting evidence, recovering documents. He waited until they had everything in one place, and now he's going to take it all at once. "Back exit," Andrew murmurs, standing slowly. "Now." They walk between bookshelves, trying to look casual while every instinct screams to run. Helen sees Brian talking to the librarian, showing his badge, asking questions. She sees the exact moment he locates them, when his eyes meet hers across the crowded room. Brian smiles. It's the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "Run!" Andrew shouts, and they explode into full speed. The library erupts in chaos. People scream, books fall, children cry. Helen and Andrew run through the back exit, pushing through the emergency door that sounds a shrill alarm. Behind them, Brian shouts orders into his radio, calling for backup. But he doesn't wait. He runs after them personally, determined not to let them escape again. The chase runs through alleys, block after block of the south side. Helen runs faster than she's ever run, lungs burning, legs screaming, but terror overcoming pain. She thinks of Michael, of her son waiting for her, and finds speed she didn't know she possessed. Andrew is behind her, slower because of the injured ribs. Helen pulls him, practically drags him when he starts to fall behind. "Leave me," Andrew gasps. Save yourself. Shut up and run, Helen growls. They turn a corner and almost collide with a construction site. Scaffolding, equipment, workers on lunch break. Helen makes an instant decision, pulling Andrew into the unfinished building. It's a labyrinth of dark corridors, unfinished stairs, rooms without walls. They climb, looking for hiding place to catch their breath and think. On the 3rd floor, Helen finds a room locked with a simple padlock. One strong kick breaks the rusted hinge and they enter, closing the door behind them. It's a storage room full of tools and equipment covered in dust. He knows we're here. Andrew gasps, holding his ribs. He'll surround the building, call backup. We're trapped. Helen doesn't respond. She's busy going through the backpack, checking if the evidence is still intact. Everything seems to be there. Documents, flash drives, hard drives. Years of evidence that can bring down an empire of corruption. Call Rebecca, Helen decides. Now, tell her where we are. If she's half the journalist you say, she'll bring cameras, document everything. Brian can't kill us if there are witnesses, if there's media. Andrew grabs the burner phone with trembling hands and dials. 3 rings. 4. 5. Rebecca Martinez. This is Andrew Douglas, he says quickly. The judge who supposedly killed himself 8 months ago. I'm alive. I'm being hunted by corrupt cops, and I have evidence of a $2 trillion corruption scheme. I need you to come to the construction building at the corner of Halsted and 47th. Bring cameras, bring witnesses, and come fast, because in 10 minutes I might be dead. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm on my way. Don't hang up. Andrew puts the phone on speaker and positions it where it'll keep recording. Everything that happens now, Rebecca will hear. It's not perfect protection, but it's something. Footsteps echo in the hallway, heavy, methodical. Brian's in no hurry now. He knows they have nowhere to go. Andrew Douglas, Brian's voice penetrates through the door. Helen Matthews, you fought well, but it's over. Come out with your hands up, hand over the evidence, and maybe you'll come out alive. Maybe? Helen shouts back. What kind of guarantee is that? The only one you'll get, Brian responds. You have 30 seconds. Helen looks at Andrew. They share a moment of silent understanding. They won't surrender. Not after everything they've been through. Even if it costs their lives, the evidence needs to reach Rebecca. You know what's funny, Brian? Andrew shouts through the door. You think you're in control, but you're talking to an investigative journalist from the Chicago Tribune right now. Every word you say is being recorded. Every threat, every admission. You just incriminated yourself live. The silence that follows is absolute. Helen can almost feel Brian processing this information, calculating the implications. You're bluffing, Brian finally says, but there's uncertainty in his voice for the first time. Are you sure? Andrew challenges. Want to bet your career, your freedom on that? Because Rebecca Martinez is listening to every word, and she has a history of publishing first, asking questions later. In 20 minutes, all this will be in national headlines. More silence. Helen holds her breath, waiting. Then, the sound that changes everything. Sirens. Multiple sirens getting louder. But they're not just police cars. Helen recognizes the sound of news trucks, the clamor of a crowd forming. Rebecca Martinez didn't come alone. She brought the whole circus. Brian Turner. A new voice echoes through the building, amplified by megaphone. This is Captain Morrison from Central District. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Helen and Andrew look at each other, barely believing. Morrison is known for being one of the few clean captains on the force. If he's here, it means Rebecca contacted the right people. This is a setup, Brian shouts back. These two are dangerous fugitives. They're attacking me. We have audio recording of everything that happened in the last 15 minutes. Morrison's voice responds calmly. We have your confession of threatening civilians, and we have Rebecca Martinez here with cameras ready to document everything. Now come out. Now. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then Helen hears it, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Brian will fight to the end. Andrew! Brian shouts, his voice loaded with desperation and rage. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. The door explodes in splinters when Brian kicks it. He enters, gun raised, aiming directly at Andrew. But Helen Matthews, the nurse who spent her life saving people, moves by instinct. She grabs a heavy tool from the table and throws it with all the force she possesses. The tool hits Brian's arm at the exact moment he pulls the trigger. The shot deviates, missing Andrew by inches and burying itself in the wall. Then the room explodes in movement. Police officers burst through windows, through the door, surrounding Brian from all sides. He tries to shoot again, but 3 tasers hit him simultaneously. He falls, convulsing, and is immobilized by half a dozen officers. "You too!" Morrison shouts at Helen and Andrew. "Hands up, slow!" They obey, moving slowly, hands above their heads. Officers frisk them, but when they find the backpack with the evidence, Morrison whistles low. "Is this what I think it is? Evidence of corruption involving 300 people and $2 trillion. Andrew confirms, his voice loaded with exhaustion and relief. All documented, all verifiable. Morrison takes the backpack carefully, as if holding a bomb. "I'm going to need you to come with me. Official statements, witness protection, the whole process." "My son," Helen says urgently. "I have an 8-year-old son." "They threatened to use him against me. Already sent a unit to protect him," Morrison assures. "He's safe." Helen almost collapses with relief. Weak knees, vision blurred by tears that finally have permission to fall. Andrew holds her, and for a moment they just stand there. 2 strangers who became unlikely allies. Survivors of a war that almost killed them. Outside, cameras capture everything. Brian Turner being led away in handcuffs, shouting about setups and injustice. Andrew Douglas, the dead judge, alive and vindicated. Helen Matthews, the nurse who risked everything for a stranger. And Rebecca Martinez, recording every second, already writing the headline that will shake Chicago to its foundations. Disappeared judge exposes billion-dollar corruption scheme. Heroic nurse saves key witness. Chapter 8, The Consequences of Courage. 3 months later, Helen sits in a new apartment on the north side. Much better than the old one, but still modest. The witness protection program paid for the move, new temporary identity, 24-hour security. But today, finally, she has permission to return to normal life. Michael is at school, thriving despite the trauma. Children are resilient in ways adults forgot how to be. He tells friends his mom is a hero, and technically, he's right. The TV is on the news. Headlines have dominated for weeks. 3 senators resign amid corruption scandal. Chicago police chief arrested. 45 officers face charges. $2 trillion in diverted funds recovered. Largest corruption case in American history. Helen turns off the TV when the doorbell rings. It's Andrew, wearing a suit for the first time since they reunited. He's back in the courts, not as a judge yet, but as the principal witness in the case he himself built. "How was today?" Helen asks, serving coffee. "Intense," Andrew admits, sinking into the sofa. "Had to take 3 more officers out in handcuffs from the room. Apparently they didn't react well when I presented the evidence against them." "How many have been convicted already?" 47. Another 200 awaiting trial. It'll take years to prosecute everyone." He takes a sip of coffee. "But it'll happen. Each one of them will pay." "And you?" Helen asks gently. "How are you dealing with everything?" Andrew is silent for a moment. "My kids forgave me for faking my death. My daughter still can't look at me, but my son is trying. It's a start." "It's more than a start," Helen corrects. "It's a miracle." "The real miracle," Andrew says, looking at her with deep gratitude, "was you. A nurse earning minimum wage, who could barely pay rent, who had every reason in the world to look the other way. But you didn't. You saw injustice and couldn't stay silent." Helen feels her cheeks flush. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Andrew says firmly. 300 people saw injustice and chose to participate in it. Thousands saw it and chose to ignore it. You were the only one who chose to fight. That's not anyone. That's extraordinary." They sit in comfortable silence. 2 survivors who understood the price of courage but paid it anyway. "I received an offer," Helen finally says. "The hospital wants to promote me to nursing supervisor. 40% salary increase, better benefits, more flexible hours. Will you accept?" "Already accepted," Helen smiles. "Means I can finally give Michael his own real bedroom, not a converted closet. Means I can pay for things without having to choose between food and electricity." "You deserve it," Andrew says sincerely. "You deserve everything good." "And you?" Helen asks. I heard rumors they're considering reinstating you to the bench. They are, Andrew confirms. But I don't know if I want to go back. 8 months on the streets showed me a part of society I ignored for 15 years as a judge. Invisible people the system fails daily. Maybe it's time to use my experience differently. Pro bono advocacy, system reform, something that really makes a difference. You'll make a difference either way, Helen assures. Just by being you. The doorbell rings again. This time it's Rebecca Martinez carrying a copy of tomorrow's edition of the Chicago Tribune. You need to see this, she says, opening the newspaper on the table. The headline occupies the entire page. Systemic reform approved. New legislation, forces, police, and financial transparency. Thanks to the evidence you provided, Rebecca explains. Congress approved the most comprehensive anti-corruption legislation in 50 years. Mandatory auditing of public contracts, independent oversight of police departments, expanded protections for whistleblowers. It's monumental. Helen feels tears forming in her eyes. Not just because they won, but because the victory means something. Real change. Systemic. Lasting. And there's more. Rebecca continues, pulling an envelope from her bag. The Pulitzer Foundation nominated me for Investigative Journalism Award. But I insisted that if I win, you two receive special recognition. Without you, there'd be no story. We don't want recognition, Andrew says quickly. We just wanted the truth to come out. Well, it did, Rebecca smiles. And the whole world is paying attention. Chapter 9. 6 months later, the new normal summer arrived in Chicago with heat that makes the city sweat and dream of air conditioning. Helen is in Millennium Park, the same place where it all began. But now during the day, surrounded by tourists and families, life and joy. Michael runs across the lawn with new friends from school, shouting and laughing with the abandon only children possess. Helen watches from the bench, permanent smile on her face, heartlight in ways she hasn't felt in years. He's getting big, a familiar voice says. Andrew sits beside her, holding 2 ice creams. He extends one to her, and Helen accepts gratefully. He's grown 3 inches in the last 6 months, Helen responds proudly. Soon he'll be taller than me. How's the new position at work? Challenging, Helen admits. But good. I'm making a difference, not just treating symptoms, but changing protocols, improving conditions. I feel like I'm finally using my full potential. And Marcus? Andrew asks cautiously. Helen's ex-husband tried to contact when the news came out, looking for settlement money that didn't exist. Lawyer sent a cease and desist letter, Helen responds with satisfaction. If he tries to approach me or Michael again, he goes back to prison. Simple as that. Andrew nods in approval. And the protection program? Ended last week, Helen says. Officially, we don't need it anymore. All the main conspirators are in prison, and those who aren't fled the country. We're safe. Safety. The word sounds strange after months living in constant alert. But it's true. For the first time in a long time, Helen can breathe without fear compressing her chest. Brian Turner was sentenced yesterday, Andrew mentions casually. 30 years without possibility of parole. And that's just for what they could prove. There are more charges coming. Good, is all Helen says. She feels no joy at Brian's imprisonment, just relief that he can't hurt anyone anymore. They eat ice cream in comfortable silence, watching Michael play, feeling the sun-warm faces that have seen too much darkness recently. I never properly thanked you, Andrew finally says. For that night, for shouting, "Don't touch him," when every instinct said to run. For saving me when I was just a dirty stranger you owed nothing to. You don't need to thank me, Helen responds. You would have done the same. I don't know if I would have, Andrew admits honestly. 8 months on the streets showed me how many people pass by need without seeing. How many times I was invisible, ignored, treated like trash. You were different. You saw me when I was invisible. Helen thinks about that night that changed everything. My mother used to say that the measure of someone's character is how they treat people who can do nothing for them. People society has discarded. That night you were someone society discarded, but you were still someone, still deserved dignity. And now, Andrew asks, now that it's all over, do you regret it? Helen considers the question seriously, thinks about the moments of absolute terror, The days not knowing if Michael would be orphaned, the sleepless nights and constant paranoia. Thinks about everything she risked, everything she almost lost. No, she finally responds. Not 1 second, because Michael is seeing that his mother fought for what was right. He's learning that sometimes you have to stand up against injustice, even when it's scary. And that's a lesson worth more than safety. Andrew smiles, and it's a smile of pure pride. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm not brave, Helen corrects. I'm just a nurse who couldn't stay silent. Exactly, Andrew says. That's the definition of courage. Michael runs up to them, face red from exercise, smile wide from ear to ear. Mommy, look what I found. He extends his hand, showing a small, shiny stone that's probably polished glass, but to him is treasure. It's beautiful, champion, Helen says, hugging her son. You can keep it forever. I'll give it to you, Michael decides, placing the stone in his mother's hand. Because you're the best mom in the world. Helen feels tears burning in her eyes. Thank you, my love. Michael runs back to his friends, and Helen holds the small stone, feeling its insignificant weight, its incalculable value. Moments like this, Andrew says softly, make it all worth it. Yes, Helen agrees. Yes, they do. They sit in silence as the sun crosses the sky, bathing the park in golden light. Somewhere in the city, trials continue. Conspirators fall. Justice slowly unfolds. But here, in this moment, there's only peace. Peace conquered with courage. Peace defended with sacrifice. Peace that came because a nurse refused to stay silent when she saw injustice. Don't touch him, Helen whispers, remembering those words that changed everything. Andrew hears and understands. Thank you, he says simply, for not letting me be invisible. Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference, Helen responds. And there, in the park where a hero was born without knowing she'd be a hero, two survivors find something rare and precious. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the world can be fixed one brave person at a time. Epilogue. 2 years later. The Chicago Tribune conference room is packed. Journalists, activists, reformers, all gathered to celebrate the second anniversary of the exposure of the biggest corruption scandal in American history. Helen Matthews is on stage wearing a simple but elegant dress, hair tied in a professional bun. She no longer looks like the exhausted nurse who worked double shifts. Now she's nursing director at Chicago Memorial, author of a best-selling book about civic courage, sought-after speaker on systemic reform. Beside her is Andrew Douglas, recently reinstated as federal judge, but now also founder of a nonprofit organization that provides free legal representation to homeless populations. When people ask me to tell the story, Helen says into the microphone, her voice clear and confident, I always start with 3 words. Don't touch him. 3 words that changed 2 lives, exposed 300 criminals, and inspired systemic reform that will protect generations. The audience applauds, but Helen raises her hand for silence. But the real story isn't about me or Andrew. It's about a choice we all face daily. See injustice and look the other way because it's safe. Or see injustice and stand up even when it's scary. That night I had every reason to run. I had a son at home, a precarious job, a fragile life that one wrong choice could destroy. But I saw a human being in danger, and something inside me couldn't stay silent. Helen pauses, searching for Michael in the audience. He's there, now 10 years old, looking at his mother with the adoration only children have. My son asked me recently if I would do it differently, knowing everything I know now, knowing the danger, the trauma, the cost, and the answer is no, because he needs to grow up in a world where people stand up against injustice, where courage is celebrated, not punished, where doing right matters more than doing safe. More applause, but Helen isn't finished. But I also want to talk about Andrew, about a man who lost everything, family, career, identity, but never lost integrity, who lived 8 months as invisible to protect truth that would save millions, who trusted a stranger because he had no one else. That's also a story of courage. Courage to continue when all hope was gone. Andrew stands, waving to the audience, but Helen sees emotion in his eyes. So when people call me a hero, Helen concludes, I correct them. I'm not a hero. I'm a nurse who saw need and responded. The difference is that the need I saw was justice, and the response required courage. But that courage is in all of us. It's in you, watching now, wondering if you would have done the same. And the answer is yes. When your time comes to choose between safety and justice, you'll choose right. Because that's what good people do. The room explodes in applause. Helen exits the stage and is immediately surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, take photos, thank her for inspiration. But she moves through the crowd with singular purpose, reaching Michael and enveloping him in a tight embrace. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Michael whispers. "I'm proud of you," Helen responds, kissing his head. "You were brave through everything." Andrew joins them, and for a moment, the three stand there, an improvised family forged in the fire of injustice and tempered in courage. "What comes now?" Michael asks. Helen looks at Andrew, who smiles. "Now," Andrew says, "we continue the work. Because corruption didn't end, injustice didn't disappear, but brave people didn't either. And as long as there are people willing to shout, 'Don't touch him,' when they see injustice, there's hope." "There's always hope," Helen agrees. And as they don't touch him, woman defended a stranger, never imagining who he really was. Impactful. Opening rain falls over Millennium Park like tears from a city that has witnessed too many crimes to remain silent. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, and Chicago's lights reflect in the puddles like fragments of a broken mirror. The park, normally packed with tourists photographing the Cloud Gate during the day, is now territory of shadows and secrets. "You shouldn't be here, vagrant." Brian Turner's voice cuts through the air like broken glass. He wears a police uniform, but the way he wields the baton has nothing official about it. It's personal. It's cruel. It's a hunt. Three men surround a hunched figure near a wooden bench. The victim wears dirty clothes, a long beard, tangled hair. He seems like just another invisible that society prefers not to see. But there's something different about him, something Brian Turner recognized. Something dangerous enough to justify an execution disguised as urban cleanup. "Please," the man whispers, protecting his head with arms too thin. "I didn't do anything." "You exist," Brian growls, and the baton descends again. "That's already too much." That's when the voice cuts through the night like human thunder. "Don't touch him!" The three men turn, surprised. A woman about 35 years old runs toward them, her hair wet from the rain, the nurse's uniform still visible under her soaked coat. She just got off the night shift at the hospital. She's exhausted, her feet hurt after 12 hours standing, but something inside her can't ignore what she's seeing. Helen Matthews plants herself between the victim and the aggressors. Her heart beats like a war drum, but her voice doesn't tremble. "Step away from him. Now." Brian Turner smiles, but there's no humor in that smile, just a promise of violence. "Or what, little nurse? Going to give me a shot?" "I'll call the real police," Helen responds, holding her cell phone with a steady hand. "Because you may have badges, but you're not police officers. You're criminals in uniform." Brian's smile disappears. His eyes narrow, calculating. The woman recognized him as police, which complicates everything. The man behind her needs to die, but now there's a witness too brave for her own good. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Brian hisses, taking a step toward her. But then, sirens sound in the distance. A real patrol car, called by someone who heard the screams. Brian grits his teeth, looks at the man on the ground, then at Helen. "This isn't over," he says, his voice loaded with threat. "I know who you are. I know where you live. And now," he points at the injured man, "you're responsible for him." The three men disappear into the shadows before the patrol car arrives. Helen falls to her knees beside the victim, her nurse's hands automatically assessing injuries. Cuts on the forehead, bruises forming, possibly broken ribs. But when she looks into the man's eyes, she sees something that makes her freeze. Intelligence, lucidity, and recognition. "You shouldn't have done that," the man whispers, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "Now your life is in danger." "Who are you?" Helen asks, but the patrol car arrives and uniformed police officers come running out. They call an ambulance, ask questions, and Helen gives her statement with the precision of someone accustomed to emergencies. But throughout the process, one question hammers in her mind. Why did those men want to kill a homeless man with such determination? And why, when she looked into his eyes, did she feel she was saving someone much more important than he appeared? She doesn't know yet, but in that moment, under Chicago's reign, Helen Matthews has just become entangled with one of the biggest corruption scandals in American history. And the man she saved isn't just any homeless person. He's Andrew Douglas, former federal judge who disappeared 8 months ago after exposing a billion-dollar corruption scheme involving politicians, businessmen, and corrupt police officers in 6 different states. And Brian Turner won't rest until both are dead. Nardi, Act I, Establishing the World. Chapter 1, The Life of Helen Matthews. The alarm clock rings at 5:30 a.m. in a modest apartment on Chicago's South Side. Helen Matthews extends her arm automatically, turning off the alarm with the precision of someone who repeats this movement for years. The dawn light has barely begun to brighten the sky, but she's already up, barefoot on the cold floor, preparing for another day that will be identical to the previous one and the next. The apartment tells a complete story in its 700 square feet. Walls with peeling paint, carefully maintained secondhand furniture, photographs taped with adhesive tape because there's no money for frames. But despite the evident poverty, there's dignity in every corner. The floors are clean, the few dishes in the sink are washed. The clothes hanging on the improvised clothesline are ironed. Helen gets dressed in the dark so as not to wake Michael, her 8-year-old son who sleeps in the only bedroom. She's been using the sofa bed in the living room for 3 years, since Michael got too big for them to share the room. She doesn't mind. Mothers adapt. Mothers make the impossible seem routine. In the tiny bathroom, Helen looks at her own reflection while tying her hair in a practical bun. At 35, her face shows signs of tiredness that go beyond age. Deep dark circles, worry lines on her forehead, a thin scar near her left eye, a reminder of a past she prefers to forget. The scar is courtesy of Marcus, her ex-husband. 5 years of marriage that began with promises of eternal love and ended with her fleeing in the middle of the night, 6 months pregnant, with just one suitcase and enough determination to remake her life. Helen shakes her head, pushing away the memories. There's no time for the past when the present demands every second of attention. In the kitchen, she prepares Michael's breakfast with mechanical movements. Cheap cereal with milk, a banana, a glass of boxed orange juice. She leaves everything on the table with a note. Good morning, champion. Mommy loves you. Don't forget your homework. Mrs. Garcia comes to pick you up at 3 p.m. Kisses, Mommy. Mrs. Garcia is the neighbor from upstairs, a 70-year-old Colombian lady who takes care of Michael after school in exchange for help with medical appointments and document translation. It's the kind of arrangement that keeps poor communities functioning, a support network built on necessity and solidarity. Helen grabs her bag, checks if she has money for public transportation, $12 enough to go and come back for 3 days if she walks part of the way, and leaves the apartment at 6:15. The hospital is 40 minutes away using 2 buses, but she always leaves an hour early. Delays cost warnings, and 3 warnings mean dismissal. The bus is packed with workers like her, people who wake before the sun to serve a city that rarely notices them. Construction workers with tools banging on their knees, cleaning ladies with uniforms under worn coats, fast food attendants who will arrive home smelling of grease and frustration. Helen sits next to a Haitian woman she's seen every day for 2 years, but with whom she's never exchanged more than greetings. There's a silent etiquette on these trips, a mutual understanding that each person is fighting too many battles to add conversation to the list. She looks out the window while Chicago awakens, gleaming skyscrapers in the distance where executives will soon arrive in imported cars for jobs that pay more in a month than she earns in a year. But here, in the city's arteries, reality is different. Stores with bars on the windows, billboards promising quick money through loans with abusive interest, small churches offering salvation next to bars offering oblivion. Helen arrives at Chicago Memorial Hospital at 7:10 with 20 minutes to spare before her shift begins. She uses these minutes to change from street clothes to hospital uniform in the cramped locker room she shares with 30 other nurses. Conversations around flow in multiple languages: English, Spanish, Tagalog, Arabic. A tower of babel of strong women who chose a profession that pays little but means much. "Helen, A familiar voice calls. It's Jessica Rodriguez, her best friend at the hospital, a vibrant 28-year-old Puerto Rican who works in pediatrics. Did you see the news? They found another body in the river. Helen shakes her head, closing her locker. Which one this time? Homeless person. Apparently beaten to death. It's the 5th this month. Jessica lowers her voice. People are saying it's social cleansing. Some cops have been killing homeless people and making it look like overdose or accident. Helen feels a chill. And nobody investigates? Who's going to investigate? Jessica responds bitterly. They're invisible. Society cares as much about them as it does about the trash it throws away. The words echo in Helen's mind as she walks to the emergency ward, where she'll work for the next 12 hours. She doesn't know yet, but these words will become terribly relevant in a few hours when she decides that not everyone can be invisible, that someone needs to see, someone needs to care, even when it costs everything. Barker. Chapter 2. Brian Turner's World. On the other side of town, in a West Side police district, Brian Turner arrives for his shift with the confidence of someone who's never been truly challenged. Tall, strong, 42 years old with 18 years of career, Brian represents everything wrong with the system when power meets no accountability. He didn't start as a corrupt cop. 20 years ago, Brian Turner was a young idealist who truly believed in serving and protecting. But the city changed him, or perhaps just revealed who he always was, underneath the uniform. Year after year of seeing rich criminals escaping unpunished while the poor went to jail for minor crimes eroded his faith in the system. And when the erosion finished, what remained was a man who decided to make his own rules. Turner, Sergeant Davis calls when Brian enters the station. Need to talk to you. Brian follows Davis to a private room where 3 other men wait. He recognizes them immediately. Detective Marcus Webb, Officer Jake Thompson, and Captain Raymond Foster, all part of the inner circle, all compromised with the scheme. We have a problem, Foster says without preamble. He's a 55-year-old man with graying hair and eyes cold as ice. The homeless man you were tracking last night. Almost got him. Brian responds, irritated with the memory. But a woman appeared. Nurse. Interrupted everything. You let him escape? Webb hisses. He's younger than Brian. Too ambitious. Too dangerous. Do you know who he is? Know what's at stake? I know exactly who he is, Brian growls. Andrew Douglas, the judge who disappeared. And I was seconds away from solving our problem when that idiot woman decided to be a hero. Foster slams the table. That's no excuse. Douglas has enough information to put 200 people in prison, including us. He knows names, account numbers, operation details. If he reaches the right people, Foster leaves the sentence hanging, but the threat is clear. He won't reach them, Brian promises. I'll find him again, and this time no interruptions. And the nurse? Thompson asks. He's the quietest of the group, but also the most violent when necessary. Brian smiles, but it's a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Helen Matthews, 35 years old, works at Chicago Memorial, lives on the South Side with an 8-year-old son. Widowed, or rather divorced from a guy serving time for domestic violence. Foster leans forward. Is she a problem? She became a problem the moment she decided to stick her nose where it wasn't called. Brian responds. But she could be useful. Douglas is injured, we'll need help. If she was a hero once, she might be again. We follow her, she leads us to him. And after? Webb asks. After, Brian says calmly. 2 tragic accidents. A homeless man dead from overdose. A nurse robbed and killed during a theft. Chicago will mourn for a day and move on. It's what this city does. The 4 men agree with nods. They've done this before, many times. 1 more body, 1 more destroyed family. Makes no difference when you've already sold your soul. Brian leaves the meeting with a clear plan. He has night shifts for the next 5 days, which means freedom to operate. He has contacts in hospitals, shelters, free clinics. If Douglas seeks help, Brian will know. And when he knows, he'll finish what he started. Chapter 3. The Mystery of Andrew Douglas. In a temporary shelter on the North Side, a man the world knew as Andrew Douglas sits on a cot, trying to process what happened last night. 8 months ago, Andrew Douglas was one of Chicago's most respected federal judges. He had presided over high-profile cases. was known for fair but severe sentences, had an impeccable reputation built over 15 years of career. He had a house in the suburbs, a stable 20-year marriage, 2 kids in college. He had the American dream, or at least its respectable upper-middle-class version. Then a case fell on his desk. A seemingly simple case of financial fraud involving a construction company, but Andrew Douglas had a fatal flaw for a man in his position. He actually read the documents. He actually investigated. And when he started pulling the thread of fraud, he discovered it was connected to a tapestry of corruption so vast it implicated senators, judges, police chiefs, and CEOs in 6 states. $2 trillion diverted over a decade. Fraudulent public contracts, overpriced construction, tax money being funneled to offshore accounts, and worse, an execution system to silence whoever discovered too much. Andrew did what an honest judge should do, compiled evidence, contacted the FBI, prepared to expose everything. Then his wife died in a car accident. Then one of his children was hospitalized after a random mugging. Then his house caught fire in an electrical fire. Andrew understood the message. Either he kept quiet or everyone he loved would die. And even if he kept quiet, eventually they'd kill him too because he knew too much. So Andrew Douglas made the hardest decision of his life. He disappeared. He faked his own death, making it look like suicide, destroyed all documentation that could lead to the evidence, and became invisible the only way that really works in a big city. He became homeless. For 8 months, Andrew lived on Chicago's streets, slept in shelters, ate at soup kitchens, learned the language and rules of a parallel society that had always existed but he'd never noticed. Let his beard grow, stopped cutting his hair, dirtied clothes until no one would recognize the distinguished federal judge and the ragged vagrant. And it worked. For 8 months, he was completely invisible. He even began to think he could survive like this indefinitely, waiting for the right opportunity to re-emerge with the evidence he had hidden. Then Brian Turner recognized him. Andrew doesn't know how. Maybe a familiar gesture, a way of speaking, some detail he couldn't disguise completely. But last night, Brian looked at him and knew exactly who he was, and would have killed him if not for a brave nurse who decided that even a homeless man deserved protection. Now, sitting in the shelter with bandaged ribs and swollen face, Andrew faces an impossible dilemma. He has the evidence hidden, documents that could destroy the corruption empire. But obtaining that evidence and delivering it to the right authorities means leaving invisibility, and leaving invisibility means certain death. Worse, he's now put an innocent in danger, a woman who had nothing to do with this, who simply couldn't stay silent when she saw injustice. A woman who's now in the crosshairs of men who don't hesitate to kill. Andrew closes his eyes, feeling the weight of all the lives at risk because of him. His family, who he left thinking he was dead. The nurse whom he condemned with his attempt to save him. All future victims if he doesn't expose the truth. He doesn't know yet, but his decision to approach Helen Matthews to warn her of danger will create an unlikely alliance that will change everything. Because sometimes courage doesn't come from having a perfect plan. It comes from 2 imperfect people deciding that some things are worth fighting for, even when all odds are against you. Just Act 2, Confrontation and Development. Chapter 4, The Unexpected Encounter. Helen arrives home at 8:30 p.m., exhausted from another 12-hour shift. Her feet are swollen, her back hurts, and she has a blood stain on her uniform from a traumatic emergency that went badly. A 19-year-old motorcyclist. They lost him on the table. She can still see the mother's eyes when they had to give the news. She climbs the building stairs, each step a small torture for legs that haven't stopped for half a day. In the 3rd-floor hallway, Mrs. Garcia is waiting with Michael. He was an angel today, Mrs. Garcia says in her English heavy with accent. Did all homework, ate all dinner, now ready to sleep. Helen hugs her son, feeling the comforting weight of his 60 pounds against her body. Michael smells like cheap soap and innocence, a combination that always manages to calm the chaos in her mind. Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. You're a lifesaver. You're welcome, mija. We're family, yes? Family. The word warms Helen's heart. She may not have much, but she has this, a community of people who care. Inside the apartment, Helen bathes Michael, brushes his teeth, puts him to bed. She reads to him, "Where the wild things are." and watches his eyes slowly close, surrendering to sleep with the absolute confidence of a child who knows he's safe. Helen stays there for a few minutes, just watching her son sleep. He's the reason for everything, the reason she endures impossible shifts, lives in a tiny apartment, refuses invitations to go out because she can't afford a babysitter. Every sacrifice, every pain, everything is worth it when she looks at that perfect face and knows he'll have a better life than hers. Finally, she drags herself to the kitchen, prepares a miserable sandwich with old bread and processed cheese, and throws herself on the sofa bed. She should sleep, has another shift in 10 hours, but her brain won't shut off, keeps returning to last night, to the man she saved, to the police who looked more like criminals. A soft knock on the door makes her jump. It's midnight. Nobody knocks on doors at midnight unless it's emergency or trouble. Helen approaches carefully, looks through the peephole. A man is on the other side, long beard, tattered clothes, but she recognizes him immediately. It's the homeless man, the man she saved last night. Helen opens the door just a crack, keeping the security chain in place. "How do you know where I live?" "Your badge." Andrew responds with a hoarse voice. "Last night when you helped me, I saw your full name in the hospital where you work. Looking up your address in public records was relatively easy. You need to leave," Helen says, but her voice trembles. "I can't get involved in whatever this is." "You're already involved," Andrew responds with desperate urgency. "The men you confronted yesterday, they'll come back. For me and for you. I need to warn you." He staggers, and Helen instinctively extends her hand to hold him. Her years as a nurse don't allow her to see someone injured without helping, even when every instinct of self-preservation screams to close the door. "Come in," she whispers, looking nervously at the hallway. "But you have 5 minutes to explain what the hell is going on." Andrew enters, and Helen locks the door behind him. She guides him to the sofa, noticing how he moves, like someone with broken ribs. Exactly what she suspected yesterday. "Who are you?" Helen demands. "And don't tell me you're just a homeless person. Those men don't try to kill ordinary homeless people with that determination." Andrew looks at her for a long moment, assessing. Then, slowly, he begins to speak. "My name is Andrew Douglas. 8 months ago, I was a federal judge. I presided over a case that exposed a corruption scheme worth billions of dollars. They killed my wife, attacked my son, burned my house, so I disappeared because it was the only way to keep my family alive." Helen feels as if the floor has disappeared beneath her feet. "Judge Douglas, but they said you killed yourself. They found your body in the lake." "They found a body," Andrew corrects. "Not mine. I paid a terminally ill man to pretend to be me. He received enough money to leave for his family, and I became nobody." "My God," Helen whispers, sinking into a chair. "So those men yesterday were part of the scheme. The leader, Brian Turner, is one of the group's enforcers. He recognized me. I don't know how, but he recognized me. And now," Andrew looks at her with eyes full of guilt and fear, "he knows you helped me, which means you're a witness. And they don't leave witnesses alive." Helen feels pure terror run through her veins. "Michael," she whispers, running to the bedroom. Her son is there, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the danger that just entered their lives. She returns to the living room, trembling. "You need to go to the police, FBI, someone." "And say what?" Andrew asks bitterly. "That the dead judge is alive and accusing half the police department of corruption. They'll kill me before I finish the sentence. Or worse, they'll pretend to protect me while finding out where I hid the evidence." "What evidence?" "Documents. Thousands of pages of evidence, all digitized and hidden in places only I know. It's my life insurance. If I die without delivering this, it'll never be found. And they know that." Helen starts pacing back and forth, her nurse's mind automatically switching to problem-solving mode. "So what do you want from me?" "Help," Andrew admits. "I know I have no right to ask. You already risked your life once for a stranger, but I don't have anyone else. All the people I trusted are dead or bought, and now you're in danger because of me. So I thought, maybe we can help each other." "How?" Helen asks, but she already knows the answer, can see it in his eyes. The same desperate determination she's seen so many times in patients who refuse to give up even when all odds are against them. You help me recover the evidence and deliver it to someone who will actually use it. Someone outside the system, because the system is rotten. And in return, Andrew pauses, in return, when it's all over, you and your son will have protection. You won't need to be afraid anymore. What if it doesn't end well? Helen asks calmly. What if we both end up dead? Then at least we tried to do the right thing. Andrew responds. And at least your son will know his mother was a hero. Helen looks at the bedroom where Michael sleeps, thinks about all the double shifts she worked, all the sacrifices she made, everything to give him a better life. But what kind of life is one where nobody stands up against injustice? Where people look the other way because it's safer? She turns her eyes back to Andrew and sees in him a reflection of her own courage. That same force that made her scream, "Don't touch him," when every survival instinct said to run. "I'll help you," Helen finally says, "but we'll do it my way. No lone heroes, no keeping secrets. We work together or we don't work." Andrew smiles for the first time, and for a moment Helen can see the distinguished judge he used to be underneath the beard and dirt. "Together," he agrees, extending his hand. Helen shakes it, sealing an agreement that will change both their lives forever. They don't know yet, but outside the building, sitting in a dark car, Brian Turner watches Helen's apartment window through binoculars. He saw Andrew enter, saw the light turn on, and now he waits. Because Brian Turner is a patient predator, and he knows that sometimes the best way to catch the big fish is to use the right bait. Proper Chapter 5. The web closes. The next morning dawns gray over Chicago, the kind of day when the sun seems to have given up fighting the clouds. Helen woke at 5:30 as always, but this time she wasn't alone in the apartment. Andrew slept on the living room floor, refusing the sofa because, as he said, 8 months on the streets teach you to sleep anywhere. Helen made strong coffee, almost poisonous, and woke Andrew with a touch on the shoulder. He jumped, instinctively protecting himself, and she saw in his eyes the trauma of months living in constant alert. "Sorry," Andrew murmurs, rubbing his face. "Still not used to safety. You need to shower," Helen says directly, always practical. "There are clothes from my ex-husband in the closet. Should fit. And I need to change that bandage on your ribs before I go to work." While Andrew showers, Helen wakes Michael and prepares his breakfast with automatic efficiency. Cereal, banana, juice, the routine that maintains sanity amid chaos. "Mommy?" Michael asks between spoonfuls of cereal. "Who is that man?" Helen freezes. She should have anticipated this question. "A friend who needs help. He'll stay here for a few days." "Is he that man you saved?" Michael asks, with the frightening perception of children. "Mrs. Garcia told me you were very brave." Helen kneels beside her son, holding his small face between her hands. "Michael, I need you to promise me something very important. You can't tell anyone about the man here. Nobody at school, no friends. Can you do that for me?" Michael looks at her with eyes too serious for 8 years. "Is he in danger?" "We both are," Helen admits, because she's never lied to her son and won't start now. "But Mommy will solve everything. I just need you to be brave and obey me." "Okay?" Michael nods, and Helen hugs him tight, inhaling the smell of children's shampoo and innocence. She'd do anything to protect that innocence. Anything. Andrew comes out of the bathroom transformed. Clean, shaven, wearing simple but adequate clothes, he finally looks like the judge he used to be. Helen looks at him and sees the transformation, not just physical, but in posture, in how he carries himself. "Better," she says approvingly. "Now you look less like someone the police will automatically stop." "It's intentional," Andrew explains. "On the streets I learned that appearance is everything. Dress like a homeless person, you're treated like trash. Dress like an ordinary worker, you become invisible for the right reason." Helen checks the clock. "I need to go to work in 20 minutes. You stay here with Michael until Mrs. Garcia arrives at 8. After that, you need to leave." "You can't stay in the apartment all day, it's too risky." "Where do I go?" "Public library," Helen suggests. "It's heated, has bathrooms, nobody asks questions, and you can use the computers to start researching who we can trust with that evidence of yours." Andrew agrees, but Helen sees the hesitation in his eyes. "What?" The evidence is hidden in 3 different places, Andrew explains. One part in a bank vault under a false name, another buried in a park. The third on an online server, but I need a specific computer to access it without being traced. Smart, Helen admits, but complicated. How will we recover everything without being caught? I don't know yet, Andrew confesses. That's why I need the library. I need to think, plan, and I need to figure out who in the FBI is still clean. Helen is about to respond when her cell phone rings. It's Jessica, her friend from the hospital, and there's panic in her voice. Helen, where are you? The police are here asking about you. Helen's heart races. What? Why? They say you were a witness to an attack last night. They want your official statement. There's a cop named Brian Turner leading. Helen hangs up abruptly. Her hands tremble as she looks at Andrew, who heard everything. They're coming, Andrew says, his voice tense. They'll pretend it's normal procedure, but as soon as you're alone with them, I know. Helen interrupts. She works in emergencies long enough to know how people disappear. I need a plan. Now. Andrew moves quickly, his legal mind coming back to life after months dormant. You go to the hospital normally. Give the statement, but don't mention anything about recognizing me or knowing who I am. You just saw a homeless person being attacked, intervened, and that's it. You don't know anything else. And you? I disappear again. Go back to the streets for a few days until surveillance loosens. Then we meet in a public, neutral place and continue the plan. No, Helen says firmly. We're not separating. That's the worst possible idea. They're expecting exactly that. Then what do you suggest? Helen thinks quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. Then she picks up the phone again and makes a call that could save or doom them both. Mrs. Garcia? I need a huge favor. 20 minutes later, Helen arrives at the hospital with calm expression that hides the internal turmoil. Brian Turner is waiting in the emergency reception, uniformed, professional, the perfect personification of a dedicated cop doing his job. Ms. Matthews? He greets with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Thank you for coming. I know you must be busy. Always am, Helen responds, keeping her voice neutral. But of course I want to help however I can. Brian guides her to an empty meeting room, closing the door behind them. The click of the lock sounds sinister, final, like a trap being set. Let's get straight to the point, Brian says, pulling out a chair but not sitting. He prefers to stand, using his height to intimidate. You interfered in a police operation last night. Operation? Helen repeats, forcing confusion into her voice. I saw 3 men beating someone. I thought it was a crime. It was an approach. Brian corrects with fake patience. The suspect was wanted for several offenses. You compromised our capture. I didn't see badges. Helen lies with impressive calm. I saw violence. I'm a nurse. My job is to protect lives. Brian leans over the table, invading her personal space. Where is the man? What man? The homeless man. The one you saved. Where is he now? Helen meets his eyes without blinking. I have no idea. The ambulance took him. I assume he was treated and released. You're police officers. Can't you track him better than I can? Something dangerous flashes in Brian's eyes. You're lying. I'm telling the truth, Helen responds calmly, though her heart is racing. And if there's nothing else, I have patients waiting. She stands to leave, but Brian blocks the way. They stand there for a moment, electric tension in the air, predator and prey assessing each other. You don't know who you're messing with, Brian says quietly, his voice loaded with barely disguised threat. Neither do you, Helen responds, surprising both with her courage. She passes by him and leaves the room, every fiber of her being screaming to run, but forcing herself to walk calmly. Jessica finds her in the hallway, eyes wide. Are you okay? That guy gave me the creeps. I'm fine, Helen lies. Just routine procedure. But she's not fine. Because now she knows for sure. Brian Turner won't give up. He'll hunt her until she makes a mistake. And when she does, he'll kill both her and Andrew and make it look like an accident. Unless they strike first. Chapter 6. Unexpected Allies. The day drags on eternally. Helen spends 12 hours suturing wounds, administering medications, saving lives, all while feeling invisible eyes watching every move. Twice she sees police cars parked near the hospital entrance. 3 times her supervisor calls her for apparently innocent questions about last night. Paranoia seeps in like poison. Every unknown person is a potential enemy. Every conversation could be a trap. Helen lives in a constant state of hypervigilance that's mentally and physically exhausting. When her shift finally ends at 8 p.m., Helen almost collapses with relief. But relief turns to terror when she sees Brian Turner waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her decrepit car. "We need to talk," he says when she approaches, blocking the driver's door. "We have nothing to talk about," Helen responds, searching for keys in her purse, but really searching for the pepper spray she's carried since fleeing Marcus 5 years ago. "Andrew Douglas." Brian says the name like a death sentence. "Federal judge disappeared 8 months ago. Declared dead. Except he's not dead, is he? He's very much alive. And you know where he is." Helen freezes, but forces her face to remain neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Brian smiles. But it's the smile of a predator that has cornered its prey. "He went to your apartment last night. Stayed there. You hit him." "That's ridiculous." "I saw." Brian interrupts calmly. "I was out there. I saw when he entered. I saw when the lights came on. I saw everything." Helen's world crumbles. If Brian saw Andrew enter, it means he knows. It means the game is over before it truly began. "Then why didn't you raid my apartment?" Helen asks. "Because if he really saw, why are they still having this conversation?" "Because I'm not an idiot," Brian responds. Raiding an innocent woman's apartment, especially after she witnessed cops beating someone. Imagine the headlines. "No, I need to do this the right way. Legal. Clean. What do you want?" "Andrew Douglas," Brian says simply. "Hand him over to me and you walk away unharmed. You and your son. Nobody needs to get hurt. Everyone goes back to their normal lives."